The Wisconsin Badgers are top 25 in returning production entering the 2024 season, bringing nearly 70% of their 2023 production back. They objectively have a top 25 staff, with an elite head coach in Luke Fickell who built up Cincinnati to compete with programs like Georgia in 2020 or Alabama in 2021, and gave Cincinnati multiple double-digit win seasons and helped them finish in the top 25 4 times and the top 10 twice. And under him are a strength coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and multiple other assistants who are great at developing players, awesome at recruiting and finding diamonds in the rough and players to further develop, and they're resilient, great, and innovative in their own right. And Luke Fickell and his staff in the Badgers have brought in a top 25 recruiting class for the 2024 cycle, factoring in multiple high school and portal commits, adding on to an already talented roster that was one of the most talented rosters in the former Big Ten West Division. And yet, I have not seen a single top 25, top 30, power rankings, whatever you want to call them. I have not seen a preseason ranking that has Wisconsin in any position to be any better than an above average or average team, despite all of the indicators that go in their favor. So today I want to talk about why Wisconsin is a contender, why they are a dark horse team. And in the truest sense of dark horse, they are more dark horse than even Iowa and Nebraska. Those teams are in multiple top 25s, including mine. But Wisconsin is still in my top 25. And there are reasons to believe that this team can wildly exceed their expectations and make a huge leap under Luke Fickell and his staff in year 2. They have an elite coaching staff, a defense that was one of the better defenses in the country last season, and they have a schedule that, while isn't easy, creates plenty of room for opportunity. So let's get it kicked off and talk about Wisconsin football on this episode of College Football with Sam. Before we resume, though, please like this video. Liking the video helps this channel expand its network. It helps bring in more college football fans, whether they are Wisconsin fans, fans of other Big Ten schools, or college football fans in general. The more we can bring into this awesome community, the better. And hitting that like button helps drive up engagement, drive up impressions, drive up clicks. It does the channel a huge service. And you can also do the channel and yourself a huge service by subscribing to the channel, clicking the notification bell, and commenting your thoughts on this video before you resume watching and after you've watched the whole thing, and give me your breakdown of Wisconsin football, your breakdown of what I'm saying. You likely see something or know something that I don't. That's the beauty of college football and also of YouTube, is there's so much information that it's almost impossible to digest it all. So the more conversations you have and the more you listen and absorb, the better with college football. And last but certainly not least, if you want to support this channel in a monetary way, I guess is how you say it, you can check out my Patreon page and or my merchandise store via the links in the description or the pinned comment. Patreon members occasionally get a sneak peek of my content if you're an All-American or Heisman member. And as the regular season approaches, there will be bonus content on there for All-American and Heisman members, not just sneak peeks of some upcoming content. And for Heisman members, after 6 months of membership, you get signed College Football with Sam merchandise. For All-American members or all Patreon members, you get your name shown at the beginning and end of every video with a shout-out at the end. With my merchandise store, you can get sweaters, t-shirts, even mugs and stickers. The most popular item, understandably so, are College Football with Sam t-shirts that are themed in all the 18 Big Ten teams. So whether you're all the way out in Los Angeles or in Eugene, or you're in New York City, Columbus, or Ann Arbor, College Football with Sam has the t-shirt for your team. And if you want to check out a similar video to the one I'm making now, click the link in the top right corner of your screen to listen to me talk about why Nebraska can reach the college football playoff. Even though it's unlikely, it's still possible. They're better than most analysts think they are, and a lot of analysts are high on this Nebraska team. There's a lot to talk about with them. Even they are being underestimated, I think, much like Wisconsin. So check out that video if you want to. I think some of the Big Ten West teams or former Big Ten West teams are going to surprise the college football universe this season. But let's talk about Wisconsin. And whenever you talk about a team, the schedule, especially now with conferences expanding and clearly the Big Ten and the SEC separating themselves into an upper tier with the Big 12 and ACC trailing behind them, the schedules are becoming ever more important. And Wisconsin's is tough. It really is a tough schedule. They open up against Western Michigan and South Dakota. 2 easy warm-up games, but then there's a home game against Alabama. At least it's at home. That's all I can really say there. Alabama is still going to be rolling, even with Nick Saban retiring. After that, the Badgers get a bye, but then have to travel to USC. They host Purdue, travel to Rutgers, travel to Northwestern, host Penn State, play at Iowa, have their second bye, host Oregon, travel to Nebraska, and they host Minnesota. ESPN's FPI ranks Wisconsin's schedule the 24th toughest in the nation. In my opinion, though, it's tougher than that. I think that's because I'm higher on Alabama and Penn State than most people are. I'm higher on the Big Ten than most people are. But again, looking at Alabama, them and Georgia, I really like them this year. And Alabama in particular, I think, is going to stay an elite team, an elite program. And I think they'll actually be a better team than they were last year. And I think this is going to be a down year in football, which means most teams, at least at the top, won't improve to what they were last year. Alabama's one of those teams. And Oregon, I have a lot of respect for Oregon, and I think they're a great team. More likely a near elite or elite team. 3 teams, Penn State, Oregon, and Alabama. 2 in the Big Ten, 1 non-conference, which is better than 3 being in the conference, are top 10, and the Badgers will play them. And USC, Rutgers, Iowa, Nebraska, and Minnesota, they could be top 25 teams as well. It's unlikely, if not impossible, that all of them will be top 25 at once, but Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, and Rutgers, they're all top 30, I believe, or top 25 in returning production, along with Wisconsin. USC isn't. In fact, they're closer to the top 100. I think they return less than 50% or less than 60% for sure of their returning production. I don't know exactly, but they lost a lot. Caleb Williams, parts of their offensive line, Marshawn Lloyd, Brennan Rice, Taj Washington. They changed out their entire defensive staff. List goes on and on with USC. But they have a lot of talent, and Lincoln Riley is a good coach, and I love their elite defensive staff. And with Penn State, Oregon, and Alabama, they've recruited at a high enough level, have elite enough staffs, and they're proven, and they return enough, all of that combined to where they're going to be top 10 teams. In fact, all of them could be top 5 teams. Those 3 teams could be top 4. They each have the potential, in my mind, to be the 3 best teams in the country. So this schedule is hard. It's a very hard schedule, and it will test this program. Luke Fickell's in year 2 now. He's had 2 incoming portal classes, 1 incoming high school class that is his own, and another that he had to maintain after Chris was fired and Leonard wasn't retained. And he's brought in his staff. He has all his guys that he wants in their offices, on the field, in the dorm rooms. It's his program now. And while it's not at the point where I think Fickell thinks it's a machine or where he wants Wisconsin to be as a football team, I think that in year 2, with the portal, with the staff, with development, with recruiting, Wisconsin, who over the past 2 decades, really 2.5, 3 decades, counting the Barry Alvarez years in the 90s, they have been a football factory, producing NFL talent, being dominant at the lines of scrimmage, which, when we look at their roster in a few minutes, you will see that they once again should have awesome, big, athletic players on the offensive line. And now they're deeper at skill position than they have been in years. than what Wisconsin is known for with what they brought in at quarterback, retained at receiver, but we'll get to that. The point is this schedule will test this program. It carries a lot of risk, but also has potential to deliver big rewards. Imagine what happens if Wisconsin, talk about this as a headline, beats Alabama. Well, Wisconsin's on the map again, even though they've played Western Michigan, South Dakota, just chump schools that Wisconsin should blow out. Even if Alabama's in a down year or their team isn't that good, and a lot of the people who are critical of Alabama and or DeBoer himself are proven right, just that win alone, that'll send Wisconsin into the stratosphere. Everyone will see them. Everyone will notice that. It'll be similar if they beat USC, and USC isn't bad, or if they beat Penn State or Oregon. And you can see where this is going. They can build momentum quickly in the schedule. They could also be a flame that is extinguished quite early. And while I am not going to tell you whether I think Wisconsin will boom or bust or go somewhere in between, I will give you reasons why they will do either. And Wisconsin has plenty of strengths, more strengths than the naked eye would tell you. Number one, this is probably the most obvious when you look at returning production, Pro Football Focus grades, and Wisconsin's history. They have one of the best offensive lines in college football. They will have a unit that can run block, that will in particular be strong at blocking for Tyler Van Dyke or whoever starts at quarterback, if not for Van Dyke, that will give the receivers time to run their routes, that will allow Ches Malusi and Tawi Walker space to operate. This offensive line is vicious. They're big, they're physical, they're athletic, they're well-trained, and they're experienced. Jack Nelson and Riley Malmon are both redshirt juniors or older, with Jack Nelson being a redshirt senior. Jake Renfro is a redshirt senior. He started for many games at Cincinnati, transferred to Wisconsin last year, performed admirably. He's back again. Joe Huber, redshirt senior at right guard. Joe Brunner is the youngest projected starter per ourlads.com on this offensive line, and he is a redshirt sophomore, 4-star out of high school. This unit is veteran. They did lose Nolan Rucci to Penn State, but he left for Penn State because Nelson and Malmon were returning, and they were going to start over him. And I think that was a move that probably benefited both Wisconsin, but also Penn State and also Nolan Rucci. It benefited all parties involved. This offensive line is deep as well. They have J.P. Benschwazel, Kerry Kodanko, James Durand. These are all players who've been with the program for at least a year, if not longer. And that's mainly on the interior. They also have incoming transfer Leighton Nelson. This line, but again, especially at tackle with Malmon and Nelson, who were graded highly by Pro Football Focus, who will be NFL players, this line is going to create problems for opposing defensive lines in the Big Ten. And this is a unit that can contend with position groups for Alabama, for Penn State, for Oregon. One of the few offensive lines in college football that could withstand Iowa's defense, which is a nest of killer hornets. Not just hornets, but killer hornets. You know, the big evasive hornets, I think, from East Asia out there that are deadly. There's a reason they're called killer hornets. That's Iowa's defense, and Wisconsin's offensive line is one of the few in the country and in the Big Ten who could withstand Iowa's pass rush, Iowa's run stop, who could open up gaps against that unit. They're better than Ohio State. They're better than Nebraska. They're better than Iowa. Those are other offensive lines that will be good, but Wisconsin will be better. Wisconsin has more experience returning on the line than Michigan, and likely could have a better offensive line than the Wolverines. Same with the Nittany Lions. The list goes on. They could have the best offensive line in the Big Ten, and that's including Oregon, who looks to be the favorite there. Skill positions are strong as well. Quarterback, wide receiver, running back. My favorite out of all of those being the wide receiver position. I really like Will Pauling. to have almost 1,000 receiving yards last year and 6 receiving touchdowns and averaging over 10 yards per pass attempt with a passing offense that passed for under 3,000 yards all season, only averaged 6.1 yards per pass attempt, and only passed for 14 touchdowns and averaged barely over a 110 passer rating. That's impressive. That's very impressive. And Will Pauling is a player who's been developed by Luke Fickell and his staff since the day he set on Cincinnati's campus, and then he transferred to Wisconsin last year. Bryson Green returns, Skylar Bell and Chimere Dike transferred out, but CJ Williams returns, and Jackson Acker at running back returns. He was involved in the passing game a bit. Tucker Ashcraft is who I was thinking of at tight end. He comes back, and he was a true freshman last year who looks to start this season as a true sophomore. If my memory serves me correctly, he's either a true sophomore or redshirt freshman. And running back with incoming power back, bulldozer, Tawi Walker to back up Ches Malusi. If Malusi can stay healthy and Walker can stay healthy, that will be a destructive 1-2 punch. And if Tyler Van Dyke is playing to his ceiling like we saw in 2021 before Josh Gaddis and Mario Cristobal just wrecked him, this offense with the offensive line will be humming. If everything turns out to be right, which is asking a lot, but with the staff that Wisconsin has, it's more likely than asking everything at Miami, for example, to turn right. If everything at Miami were to go the right way, they could contend for a national championship this year with their roster. But I'd say that's close to impossible given the staff they have, specifically their head coach. With Wisconsin, Luke Fickell, I think, being a great game manager, great developer, program builder, decision maker, and having great coordinators and assistant coaches, I think his staff has one of the best chances of any staff to maximize the talent they have. And this offense could be one of the more electric offenses in the Big Ten in the country if they do that on that side of the ball. And then there's the defense. Mike Tressel's defenses. Just watch 2018 Michigan State where they had no offense. I mean, that team was the Iowa of the Big Ten East that year. Or watch 2021 Cincinnati with Kobe Bryant and Sauce Gardner. Who coordinated that defense, may you ask? Well, that was Mike Tressel. Perry Alano developed those corners as he was the cornerbacks coach, secondary coach at Cincinnati then, but Tressel also put those players in positions to win, and he helped slow down a Bryce Young, Jameson Williams-led offense at Alabama that when they were on, they were on. Last year, Wisconsin's defense, they were able to slow down opponents. It wasn't because of the defense that Wisconsin lost. It was their anemic, insufferable offense. The entire Big Ten West last year had no offense, and some of the teams like Nebraska, Wisconsin, and Iowa had defenses. Minnesota, Purdue, Illinois, and Northwestern didn't really have anything better than above average or average defenses, which makes what David Braun did at Northwestern that much more admirable. But we're talking about Wisconsin here. This defense, with how much it returns, particularly at the secondary, with Ricardo Hallman and Hunter Wohler and Kamoy Latu, they should be good. They should be one of the more explosive secondaries in college football. And what I mean by that is Ricardo Hallman had 7 picks and 1 interception. He comes back. And Hunter Wohler had 2 interceptions, 6 passes defended, 120 tackles, which led the team, and a sack. So this secondary is experienced. They're disciplined. Wisconsin runs a 2-4-5, 3-3-5 defense, so they have more defensive backs out there than some other more traditional defenses, whether that's in the Big Ten or the SEC. And Mike Tressel is a damn good defensive coordinator. So really, Wisconsin's strengths can extend to all points of the field, the roster, the staff, you name it. Their strengths, I think, outnumber their weaknesses, but it's not fair to only talk about their strengths and ignore some of the bad and the ugly. The bad, I think, is Tyler Van Dyke. I think that's the potential for bad. Ugly is a point where you just know that's going to be a weak link You just know. Or if it is a weak link, the whole train could fall apart. You'll see what I mean. Tyler Van Dyke could be the bad. He could also be the good, though. If he plays like he did in 2021 with Phil Longo calling the plays, developing the offense, the offensive line that the Badgers have, and the skill position talent, well, Van Dyke will be successful. He'll be one of the Big Ten's better quarterbacks, and Wisconsin may get a top 10 upset. And they may contend for, dare I say it, a college football playoff spot with the other things that look to go right. Tyler Van Dyke last season passed for 2,703 yards, 19 touchdowns, 12 picks, and he had the 31st best quarterback efficiency rating. In 2021, his best season, 25 passing touchdowns, 6 picks, 2,931 yards, completed 62.3% of his passes, and had a 160 passer rating. Great quarterback in 2021. Bad in 2022, but we chalked most of that up to Josh Gaddis and just a bad, disorganized offense. Last year, he started out hot against Miami of Ohio, Texas A&M, Bethune-Cookman, Temple. The Georgia Tech game is when things really began to fall apart. Did okay against UNC, even with 2 picks. After that North Carolina game, the turnovers continued to rack up, and at one point, he was on a 3-game streak of throwing at least 1 interception, no touchdowns against FSU, North Carolina State, and Virginia, in which the Hurricanes went 1-2. Van Dyke threw 6 picks, no touchdowns, averaged 2 interceptions per game. He has a turnover problem, and I think he needed a new start. I think many people would agree with that. We'll see if it works out for him and Wisconsin, this combination in Madison. We do not know, frankly, if he's a good or bad QB. Maybe he needed the break, a staff change. Maybe he needed his head coach to actually put him in positions to win, which that's not one of Mario Cristobal's specialties. Or maybe he's just not that good, and his true freshman season was lightning in a bottle with a team that should have performed better than they did. The 2021 Miami Hurricanes returned nearly 90% of their production. I mean, they should have been, by the average predictive metrics like returning production, returning star talent, etc., they should have been a top 20, top 25, top 20, top 15 team. But they weren't, and they lost to some teams that they shouldn't have lost to, and their schedule was tougher than anticipated, with Michigan State having a really good year that no one saw coming then. Tight end, who will break out there? Tucker Ashcraft and Riley Nowakowski need to step up their production. Nowakowski, he's the older of the two. He's projected to be the backup as a redshirt senior. Ashcraft is a true sophomore, projected to start. And Tucker Ashcraft last year, he didn't even have 100 receiving yards. Wisconsin typically has good tight end play. They're not known like Iowa is with Sam Laporta, with Luke Lachey, with Eric All. I mean, Eric All was great at Michigan when healthy, and he led Iowa in receiving yards for all of last year, despite being injured little under halfway through the season. Or Hawkinson or Fant, you go. I mean, Iowa is tight end you. If not them, I don't know who else. But Wisconsin's typically been good at the tight end position, but they don't have much production there. Their lead producer at tight end, Hayden Rucci, is no longer with the program. He, I think, graduated, ran out of eligibility. Tucker Ashcraft only had 86 receiving yards and 1 receiving touchdown last year. Nowakowski had 57 receiving yards and 1 receiving touchdown last year. So they were involved in the offense, but not in a just massive, groundbreaking way. Look at 2021, for example. That's when Graham Mertz was Wisconsin's quarterback, and their passing offense was awful. Jake Ferguson, 46 receptions, 450 yards, 3 receiving touchdowns. He was dominating opposing defenses when Mertz wasn't throwing the ball to other teams. If Wisconsin can get a Jake Ferguson-level tight end out of Ashcraft or Nowakowski, that will help open up this offense and even help with blocking as well, not just in the passing offense. And finally, the staff is awesome. Don't get me wrong. I will praise Wisconsin's staff for the rest of this preseason, and I'm expecting to praise them after this coming season as well, where I think Wisconsin will look better, in fact, much better compared to last year. But they need to agree on the team's identity. This is something that I'm going to draw a parallel to Nebraska. Nebraska, I thought last year was better than Wisconsin at sticking to their identity and forming a foundation. But toward the end, specifically in their game against Wisconsin, they pivoted. And I felt like that's why they lost to the Badgers in Madison. Wisconsin, all of last year, are we going to be pass heavy? Are we going to be run heavy? What type of quarterback play are we going to get today? The defense was overall good, great, but there were moments that were disappointing at times. They were all over the place, and that's understandable with a rebuild, but I thought that some of it was excessive. There needs to be a plan and identity set in place from the beginning. Adapting is good. Responding to teams' punches, having counter punches, having multiple game plans and multiple tactics. What's not good is constantly pivoting and not sticking to your identity when you need to stick to your identity. And that, with what I feel like could be multiple conflicting philosophies, Fickell's more of a defensive guy. I think he's more comfortable with his defensive coordinator, Mike Tressel, than his offensive coordinator, Phil Longo. Longo is air raid, explosive plays. I mean, look at North Carolina when he was their offensive coordinator. The offense was awesome. The defense sucked. And then Cincinnati with Fickell and also Tressel in 21 and 22. They were more of a defensive team with a capable offense, but not a great offense. It was an elite defense with a above average good offense that could have great moments, particularly in the ground game. The hiring of Phil Longo was surprising, not just because of the change for Wisconsin, but the change in Fickell as well. I would have expected Fickell to more or less so continue Wisconsin's tradition of offense, simply modernizing it like what Jim Harbaugh did to Michigan, but he went for a radical change, and we have yet to see if that will work out, and that could be the downfall of this team, because again, with this schedule, they could quickly fall apart very easily. Wisconsin has an elite staff as well. This is something that I mentioned earlier. I think this goes to their benefit, obviously, but I want to dive a little deeper because I imagine some people may question whether they're elite, near elite, or great and just say, oh, they're good, or there's not a reason to be high on them or to praise this staff. Again, Wisconsin's a team that's not really being talked about. Luke Fickell has a 71-31 record in his career. Ohio State, Cincinnati, and last year at Wisconsin. His team's finishing in the top 10 twice and top 25 4 times, all at Cincinnati, who has very limited resources, limited dedication to football. Therefore, they have limited talent. I still think Fickell is a top 10 head coach, even though he underperformed compared to my expectations last year. In hindsight, a rebuild was needed. Things needed to be teared down before they could be built back up. Phil Longo developed Sam Howell at North Carolina, and he had success at Ole Miss and also Sam Houston State. And I think his offense will improve in the second year of his system in 2023, similar to what I think Garrett Riley's offense will do at Clemson. And also Matt Rule's and Marcus Satterfield's at Nebraska. Nebraska and Wisconsin are so similar. I mean, they're more so different when you look at their roster and even their staff and philosophies, but I think they're in a similar boat. Underperforming to last year for what they could have been, and they are dark horse teams that are even being underestimated by, I think, their biggest admirers and supporters. Wisconsin, they also have a member of the staff who I'm not a fan of, in Alex Grinch. I don't get why he was even hired. Makes no sense. I feel a similar way, though not as negatively, about Marcus Satterfield at Nebraska, although Satterfield plays a bigger role within the program, being offensive coordinator, while Grinch, he has the co-defensive coordinator title, but really he's just the safeties coach. Phil Longo is a coordinator I have some questions about, but I'm willing to give him benefit of the doubt because it was year one, and Chris left the offense in rough condition. Again, look at who was leading Wisconsin last year. Will Pauling at receiver, incoming transfer. Braylon Allen did well, and so did Ches Malusi, but that was about it, along with some of the offensive linemen too, which was Wisconsin's bread and butter. In the areas that needed to be modernized, it was Luke Fickell recruits and players that Luke Fickell brought to Wisconsin via the portal that did well, not Chris recruited or Chris developed players. So again, there needed to be some weeding out, tearing down before Fickell and the staff could build back up, especially on the offense. So I'm willing to give Longo another year before I really begin to question him. And of course, Mike Tressel is one of the best defensive coordinators in the country. He has coached top 20 defenses 4 out of his 5 seasons as a coordinator at Michigan State, Cincinnati, and also Wisconsin. And by top 20, I mean top 20 in the statistic that, while it can sometimes be misleading, is ultimately the one that matters the most: scoring defense. And his defenses were actually top 10 in scoring in 2018 and also 2021. He's my favorite of the 2 coordinators. I think that's pretty obvious from what I've said. But overall, this staff, along with Brady Collins as the strength coach, Paul Haynes at cornerbacks coach, is a position coach that I really like. And I think that's very clear given how Ricardo Hallman had some rough games in 2022 to where last year he was an awesome cornerback. This secondary, this team, the offensive line, the receivers, there are so many things to like about this team, and an elite staff isn't the icing on the cake. The elite staff is a critical part of the cake. It's what gives it its texture and its taste. The icing on the cake is really whether it's the depth or whether it's an individual player you want to name. That's the icing on the cake. But the foundation, the foundational ingredients, that's this staff and the strength and conditioning and the roster as a whole, which I think is in a good position. So can Wisconsin contend? Well, I think the answer is yes. They have an elite staff, and if they just earn one top 10 upset and take care of the rest of their games against non-top 10 opponents, a 10-2 Wisconsin is in the college football playoff conversation. They're only given a 3.9% chance to make the college football playoff, so like my video about Nebraska, those are not positive odds. But with a tougher schedule than Nebraska's, yet there is no road game against Ohio State, which, I mean, that for anyone, that would be a nearly impossible feat outside of Georgia or Bama or Michigan. The fact Wisconsin gets all of their top 10 matchups at home, and there are still games that, if everything goes right, are very winnable, like USC or Iowa or Rutgers. I mean, depending on what type of season Oregon, Penn State, or Alabama has, maybe we look back on those games and say, it makes sense why Wisconsin beat them. Wisconsin ended up being the better team, and it wasn't an upset. It was just an upset at the time, but in retrospect, it wasn't. I hope that makes sense. I think that they would make it with a 10-2 record. This is opposed to Nebraska, who I think has a schedule such that they would miss the college football playoff with a 10-2 record, because it's not a tough schedule. It isn't. I mean, the November slate is hard, but there isn't a team there who will be in the top 10. And at Ohio State, that's almost an auto loss. I don't think that there's an auto loss on this schedule. There are 3 games that very likely will be losses. Other games that could be if Wisconsin doesn't take care of business or they lose momentum. There isn't the same type of auto loss, though, which I think gives them potentially even better odds than Nebraska, in my opinion, to make the college football playoff. They returned 68% of their production and brought in 16 transfers. I think this team is guaranteed to improve from last year, and that's why I have them inside of my top 25. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thank you to Crash2488 and Brasco Rascal for sponsoring this video and channel as Heisman patrons. Thanks to Chris Lane, Connor Little OH for sponsoring this video and channel as All-American patrons. Thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for sponsoring this video and channel as All-Conference patrons. Have a great day, guys, and I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.